The wind swept across the rugged plains, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant howl of coyotes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Amid the vast, unforgiving landscape, a lone figure pressed forward, an Apache woman, her cloak torn and dusty, her eyes reflecting exhaustion and determination. She had been traveling for days through harsh terrain, guided only by instinct and the faint hope of finding shelter before nightfall. Her body ached from walking, yet she knew she could not stop until she reached safety. The wilderness was unforgiving, and every hour alone carried the risk of danger, whether from wildlife, hostile travelers, or the unforgiving land itself. She spotted a small cabin in the distance, a humble structure of weathered wood, smoke curling gently from its chimney. Her heart leapt with cautious hope. She had no idea who lived there, or if the person would help her, but the sight of human habitation was irresistible. She quickened her pace, her boots sinking into the soft earth, leaving a trail in the dust behind her. By the time she reached the cabin, the sky had darkened to a deep, velvety blue, and the first stars twinkled like distant fires. The cabin door opened slowly, revealing a man, a rancher, solitary and rugged, with a face weathered by years under the sun and hands calloused from labor. He studied her cautiously, taking in her worn clothing, the dirt smeared across her skin, and the exhaustion in her eyes. Strangers were rare in these parts, and visitors often brought trouble. He had learned over the years that trust was a luxury he could not afford. "Who are you?" he asked gruffly. I just need a place to stay for one night," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and humility. "I have nowhere else to go. Please." She did not reveal her full story, protecting herself with measured words. There was pride in her plea, a dignity that suggested she had faced hardships before and survived. The rancher hesitated. He had lived alone for years, his life measured and routine, free from the complications of visitors. Yet something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a flicker of desperation tempered with dignity, stirred a sense of compassion he had long buried. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the cabin. "One night, that's all. You leave at sunrise." Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and earth. The rancher lit a small fire, and they shared a simple meal of bread, salted meat, and water. The woman's hands were calloused from travel, yet her manners were polite and precise. She ate slowly, never complaining about the simplicity of the food. Conversation started cautiously, each word measured. She spoke of the land, of the challenges she had faced, of her people, without revealing too much personal detail. The rancher listened, intrigued despite himself. He shared stories of the land he had tamed, of the solitude he endured, and of the struggles that had shaped him. As the night deepened, a quiet intimacy began to form. Words were sparse, but each glance and gesture carried meaning. She admired his competence and strength, how he moved with purpose, how he handled tasks with quiet efficiency. He, in turn, noticed her resilience, the way she carried herself despite exhaustion, the sharpness of her eyes, and the grace in her movements. Neither had anticipated this connection, yet it grew naturally, rooted in shared understanding rather than romance. Suddenly, a threat emerged outside. Perhaps it was a pack of wolves drawn near by the scent of food, or the sound of horse hooves indicating strangers approaching with ill intent. The rancher moved instinctively, alert and protective. He ensured the woman's safety, checking locks, lighting additional fires, and even positioning himself where he could confront danger if needed. The woman watched him, impressed by his courage and resourcefulness. In that moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed to soften, and she saw the depth of his character. A protector, a man who could be trusted in times of danger. The night continued, filled with quiet moments by the fire. They spoke in whispers, sharing fragments of their pasts, tales of hardship, loss, and survival. She spoke of her travels, of leaving her home behind, and of seeking refuge in a world that often showed little mercy. He shared memories of solitude, of his days managing the land, and of the loneliness that had become his constant companion. Words alone were not enough to capture the bond forming between them. It was felt in the silences, in the small gestures, a hand brushing against the other, the offer of a blanket, the simple act of sharing warmth. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the cabin window, she was ready to leave. Her journey was not yet complete, and her pride urged her onward. But leaving felt heavier than she anticipated. For the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of attachment, a pull toward this man who had shown her kindness without expectation. The rancher, too, felt the sting of impending separation. He offered her supplies for the road, a small pack with food, water, and a blanket, and quietly encouraged her to return if she ever needed help. As she walked away from the cabin, the sun rising behind her, both were changed. What had begun as a simple act of mercy, a night of shelter, had become the beginning of a connection neither could ignore. In the vast, lonely expanse of the West, two solitary lives had intersected, and in that intersection, a bond had been forged. It was a bond built on trust, shared vulnerability, and the understanding that even brief encounters could alter the course of a life. This outline emphasizes the slow-building emotional connection, the interplay of trust and vulnerability, and the realistic depiction of life in a harsh, isolated environment. It sets the foundation for romance and future developments while keeping the narrative grounded in the characters' personal struggles, resilience, and the unpredictable nature of human relationships in the frontier. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting golden light across the open plains. The Apache woman had spent the night in the cabin, and now, with the warmth of day, she prepared to leave. Yet, as she packed her few belongings, she found herself reluctant to step outside. Her body ached from travel, but her heart carried an unfamiliar weight, a strange sense of attachment to the rugged rancher who had offered her shelter without question. The rancher, meanwhile, busied himself with the morning chores. He tended to the horses, checked fences, and repaired equipment, all with the precision born of years managing the land alone. But his eyes often drifted toward the cabin's door, where she moved quietly, gathering her cloak and small pack. He had expected her to leave without a second thought, as most travelers did. Yet he felt a strange pang of disappointment at the thought of her departure. Their connection, brief as it was, had stirred something in him, something he had long buried under routine and solitude. The woman finally stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and earth. She offered a polite nod, attempting to hide her hesitation. The rancher, normally taciturn, found himself speaking before he could stop. "The trail ahead is rough. There's water a few miles west if you need it, and some shade near the creek." His tone was gruff but caring. She met his gaze, recognizing the rare kindness in his words. "I appreciate it," she replied quietly. "I'll be careful." As she set off down the dusty path, their thoughts lingered on the night that had passed. The Apache woman thought about the warmth of the fire, the quiet conversation, and the surprising gentleness of the rancher. She realized she had expected him to be cold, unwelcoming, perhaps even hostile, but he had offered her safety, food, and a listening ear. That one night had shattered her assumptions about strangers in this harsh land, and she found herself wondering if paths could cross again. For his part, the rancher returned to his work, yet every task felt slightly hollow without her presence. He replayed their conversations in his mind, remembering the subtle grace in her gestures, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and the courage she had shown in traveling alone through dangerous terrain. He had always believed that his life of solitude suited him, yet now he questioned whether isolation truly protected him from the emptiness he had felt for years. The peace of the morning was interrupted by an unexpected event. Perhaps a neighboring rancher arrived seeking help, or wild animals threatened the crops and livestock, demanding immediate attention. In the chaos, the Apache woman's face appeared in his mind, and he realized how much her presence had mattered. That night had offered not just company, but perspective. He had seen life through the eyes of someone who struggled in ways he had never faced. The stark contrast reminded him that life could be harsher than he knew, and it awakened empathy he had long neglected. Meanwhile, the woman's journey continued, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the rancher. Each step was heavy with the memory of his quiet strength and unexpected warmth. She realized that she had been seeking more than shelter. She had been seeking safety, understanding, and perhaps, without realizing it, companionship. The thought unsettled her. She had always been independent, relying solely on herself. To feel a pull toward someone else was both foreign and frightening. Back at the ranch, the rancher made a decision. He could not ignore the connection that had formed overnight. Though he valued his solitude, he understood that human bonds were not accidental. They had the power to change lives. He considered leaving a note or sending a message along her likely path, offering further assistance, but he hesitated. Pride, fear, and uncertainty restrained him. Yet inaction felt heavier than risk, and he resolved to keep the door open for her, should she return. As the days passed, both grappled with uncertainty. She faced obstacles on the trail, difficult terrain, scarce water, and the ever-present threat of hostile encounters. Each challenge reminded her of the rancher's protective nature, his strength that had reassured her during the night. She realized that his help had extended beyond shelter. It had been a demonstration of character, a glimpse into the kind of man he was when he chose to act selflessly. Meanwhile, the rancher's solitude was punctuated by routine reminders of the night. A missing tool, a sound in the distance, the echo of her voice in his memory. Each detail reinforced the significance of her brief visit. He began to anticipate her return, whether consciously or unconsciously, and the anticipation filled his life with tension, hope, and a hint of fear. Could he allow himself to hope for her return, knowing the uncertainties that lay ahead? The story intensifies when their paths cross again. Perhaps she returns to the ranch seeking supplies, shelter from a storm, or news of her journey. The reunion is charged with tension. Neither expected to see the other again so soon. Their interactions reveal subtle shifts. The woman feels a growing trust and curiosity toward the rancher, while he becomes increasingly aware of his protective instincts and desire for companionship. Their dialogue, actions, and gestures begin to hint at the emotional bond forming between them, moving beyond mere politeness into unspoken understanding. By the end of this outline, the characters have shifted from uneasy acquaintances to companions bound by trust and mutual respect. The Apache woman begins to question her independence in light of genuine connection, while the rancher confronts the loneliness that has defined his life. The story sets the stage for deeper emotional exploration, romantic development, and the inevitable external conflicts that will challenge their growing bond. This outline emphasizes character development and emotional depth. It explores the subtle changes in both the Apache woman and the rancher, focusing on internal conflict, the tension between independence and connection, and the human need for empathy and companionship. The rising tension, through external obstacles and internal reflection, prepares the narrative for the dramatic developments in the subsequent outlines. The days following their initial encounter at the cabin seemed almost serene, yet the vast wilderness of the West never truly allowed for peace. The Apache woman had returned, as she had been subtly drawn to the rancher, not out of necessity alone, but because something in him had stirred emotions she had long suppressed. For his part, the rancher had accepted her presence in his life with cautious optimism. Their companionship was still tentative, rooted in mutual respect and the shared memory of that first night, but a subtle warmth had begun to grow between them. Yet the world around them was unforgiving. The peace of their budding friendship was shattered one morning by a distant, ominous sound, the pounding of hooves across the open plains. The rancher's eyes narrowed, recognizing the danger instantly. A small band of men, possibly outlaws, or perhaps rival hunters or land grabbers, was heading straight for his property. They were looking for trouble, supplies, livestock, or perhaps simply to assert dominance. The Apache woman froze beside him, sensing danger, but the rancher's calm, decisive movements reassured her. In that moment, trust became essential. The rancher acted swiftly, herding livestock into more secure pens and barricading doors with whatever tools he could find. The Apache woman, despite her exhaustion from travel, moved with precision and courage. She gathered weapons, assisted with barricades, and relayed information about the terrain she had observed while traveling, a skill she had honed from survival on the move. Her knowledge of the land and its dangers became invaluable, and the rancher realized that her presence was not just welcome, but necessary. As tension mounted, they worked in seamless coordination. The rancher, accustomed to handling emergencies alone, began to rely on her instincts and suggestions. He noticed her ability to stay calm under pressure, to assess danger, and to make decisions that saved time and effort. Their communication evolved into a silent understanding, gestures and glances replacing words. They were no longer merely companions or temporary allies. They had become a team. The shared danger forged a bond stronger than words could describe. The threat reached its peak in a dramatic confrontation. The band of men approached the cabin with ill intent, shouting demands and brandishing weapons. The rancher stood his ground, ready to protect his land, while the Apache woman remained calm but vigilant. She observed weaknesses in their formation, suggested tactical positions, and even assisted in strategic distractions to confuse the intruders. The rancher, though initially protective, began to see her as an equal in courage and ingenuity. Her presence was no longer simply comforting. It was empowering. Through the night, a tense standoff ensued. Fires blazed outside, shadows danced across the landscape, and the rancher and the Apache woman moved like shadows themselves, coordinating their defense. They faced danger together, and in the face of shared threat, emotional walls melted away. For the first time, the rancher allowed himself to feel vulnerability, knowing he depended on her as much as she depended on him. Likewise, the Apache woman realized that she could trust him completely, not just with her safety, but with her life and her heart. After the confrontation, as dawn broke and the danger dissipated, both were physically and emotionally drained. The rancher examined the aftermath: minor damage to the cabin, livestock safe, and his trust in the Apache woman fully validated. She tended to small injuries, ensured he had food and water, and even offered a few comforting words, acts of care that felt more intimate than any declarations of love could have been. In these moments, unspoken emotions surfaced: gratitude, admiration, and a slowly blossoming affection that neither could deny. The Apache woman began to see the rancher not just as a protector, but as someone whose presence brought stability and comfort. The rancher, in turn, recognized the value of companionship, courage, and intellect that complemented his rugged life. The threat had not only tested their physical endurance, but had deepened emotional trust. They realized that survival in the West was not merely about skills or toughness, but about mutual reliance, empathy, and connection. This outline also introduces subtle emotional development. There are moments of reflection where the Apache woman considers what it would mean to leave again versus staying with the rancher, weighing her independence against the comfort of trust and companionship. A rancher, who had long relied solely on himself, contemplates what life might be like with her as a permanent part of it. This internal conflict adds layers of tension, making their eventual romantic connection feel earned and realistic. Finally, the story closes the outline with a quiet moment of connection after the external threat has passed. The rancher and the Apache woman sit by the fire, exhausted but alive, sharing a meal and conversation that is calmer, warmer, and more intimate than before. They no longer speak as strangers or uneasy companions. They speak as allies and equals. The seeds of romance, planted in the first night and nurtured by shared challenges, are now visible, though unspoken. Each glance, each slight touch, and each shared smile reinforces the growing emotional bond between them. This outline emphasizes how external conflict accelerates trust and intimacy. The character's growth is rooted in action and reaction, showing that shared danger can create emotional closeness. It builds suspense, showcases the Apache woman's strength and intelligence, and portrays the rancher's transformation from solitary to emotionally open. The narrative also prepares for further developments where romance, societal pressures, and personal vulnerabilities will intersect. The days after the confrontation had left the Apache woman and the rancher closer than ever, though neither fully acknowledged the depth of their feelings. Life on the ranch returned to its usual rhythm, the sun rising over the plains, chores to complete, horses to tend, and fences to repair. Yet beneath this ordinary routine, an extraordinary bond was growing, nurtured by shared experiences, quiet gestures, and the unspoken knowledge that they could depend on one another. The Apache woman had begun to see the ranch not merely as a place of temporary refuge, but as a place where she could belong. The rough-hewn cabin, once merely a shelter, had begun to feel like home. She noticed small details, the way he prepared meals, the care he took in maintaining the land, the way he observed the natural rhythms of life. Each observation deepened her appreciation for him, and with it, her sense of trust. For someone who had lived a life constantly on the move, with every step dictated by survival and caution, this new feeling of stability was both foreign and comforting. For the rancher, her presence was becoming indispensable. He had spent years in solitude, relying on no one but himself. But now, her laughter, her sharp observations, and even her quiet moments of reflection filled a void he had long thought permanent. He found himself anticipating her input, valuing her opinions, and increasingly noticing her in ways that went beyond simple companionship. The way she moved with purpose, her attentiveness to the land, and the strength behind her quiet demeanor stirred something within him, an awareness that life could be richer when shared. One afternoon, an opportunity arose for them to work together on the ranch. A fence had been damaged in a recent storm, and the rancher was faced with a daunting repair. The Apache woman offered to help. At first, he hesitated. He was used to working alone, believing that involving another person would slow him down. But he soon realized that with her assistance, the work progressed faster and more efficiently. As they labored side by side, their hands occasionally brushed, sending sparks neither could ignore. Conversations flowed easily now, no longer tentative, and filled with humor, teasing, and shared insights. During breaks, they shared meals outdoors, the sun warming their faces, the wind carrying scents of sagebrush and earth. In these moments, they allowed themselves glimpses of vulnerability. She spoke of the hardships she had endured, leaving her home, navigating dangers alone, and the loneliness that had accompanied her independence. He listened with patience and empathy, sharing some of his own burdens, the losses he had suffered, the solitude he had endured, and the regrets he had carried silently for years. By opening themselves in this way, they built trust that went beyond physical safety. It became emotional intimacy. One evening, a quiet moment by the fire solidified this growing bond. The Apache woman, hesitant yet emboldened by trust, shared a fear she had long kept hidden. The thought that she might never find a place where she truly belonged. She spoke of the isolation of her people, the hardships faced by those who walked alone, and the longing for connection she often suppressed in favor of survival. The rancher listened without interruption, understanding that her vulnerability was a gift, an offering of trust. In response, the rancher allowed himself to express something he had not done in years. He admitted that he had grown accustomed to his solitary life, but had recently realized how empty it truly was. He acknowledged that her presence had changed the rhythm of his days, that her courage and intelligence had earned his respect, and that her kindness had touched a part of his heart he thought was long buried. Neither spoke of love yet, but the foundation was being laid. They understood that emotions could not be forced, yet they were undeniable. A turning point in this outline comes when a minor accident occurs on the ranch. Perhaps she trips while tending to the horses, or a small mishap threatens to injure her. The rancher reacts instinctively, rushing to her side, his concern immediate and heartfelt. This moment crystallizes the emotional stakes. Their bond has grown beyond casual companionship into genuine care. It is not just survival that binds them. It is concern for one another's well-being, a recognition that their lives have become entwined. From this point, subtle gestures dominate the narrative. He begins leaving small tokens for her, an extra blanket by the fire, food prepared just the way she likes it, or a small gift of wildflowers. She reciprocates in her own way, perhaps by preparing meals with care, assisting with his chores without being asked, or simply sharing moments of quiet understanding. These gestures speak volumes about affection, trust, and growing emotional attachment. The narrative also explores their inner thoughts, emphasizing the tension between desire and caution. Both are aware of the risks of opening one's heart in a world that can be harsh and unpredictable. She fears losing her independence. He fears vulnerability and potential heartbreak. Yet the comfort and trust they find in each other outweigh these fears, drawing them closer day by day. By the end of this outline, it is clear that the Apache woman and the rancher are moving towards something lasting. They have shared danger, labor, laughter, and vulnerability. Their bond is now not only emotional, but almost spiritual, rooted in respect, trust, and the realization that they complement each other in ways that make them stronger together than apart. The outline sets the stage for the final step in their journey, the decision to commit to one another, overcoming both external and internal obstacles to embrace love fully. This outline emphasizes emotional intimacy and personal growth, highlighting how shared experiences and vulnerability create deep bonds. It also balances romance with realism, showing that love is built over time through trust, care, and mutual respect. The story is poised to move into its final chapter, where commitment, obstacles, and ultimate union will define the resolution. The days had grown warmer, the plains bathed in sunlight, and life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that was no longer solitary, but shared. The Apache woman had been staying for weeks now, her presence seamlessly woven into the fabric of the rancher's life. Tasks that once seemed mundane now carried a subtle joy, performed side by side. The chores, once solitary, had become a dance of cooperation, laughter, and quiet companionship. Yet, despite the comfort of routine, both knew that unspoken questions lingered in their hearts, questions of belonging, permanence, and the courage to embrace love in a world so full of uncertainty. One morning, news arrived from the surrounding area. Perhaps another traveler warned of approaching bandits, or a neighboring rancher brought urgent word of danger encroaching on their land. The threat, though minor compared to previous dangers, stirred a sense of urgency. It reminded them that life in the West could be unpredictable, and that safety, emotional as well as physical, was never guaranteed. But rather than causing fear, this small crisis drew them even closer. The Apache woman and the rancher moved with seamless cooperation, their trust and reliance on each other now second nature. They recognized, without speaking, that their lives had become intertwined in ways that could not be undone. After resolving the immediate danger, they returned to the cabin, both physically exhausted, yet emotionally alert. In the quiet of the evening, a fire was lit, casting a warm glow across the wooden interior. The Apache woman, sitting across from the rancher, finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability she had carefully guarded for so long. She spoke openly of her past, the hardships she had endured, the family she had lost or left behind, and the loneliness that had shaped her life. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of sharing a deeply personal story with someone she trusted implicitly. The rancher listened with unwavering attention. Unlike the fleeting connections of his past, he did not offer judgment, advice, or distraction. Instead, he offered presence, a silent but powerful affirmation of her worth and courage. When she finished, a quiet settled over them, filled not with awkwardness, but with profound understanding. In that moment, both realized that what had begun as a single night of shelter had grown into something far deeper, a bond that encompassed trust, admiration, and emerging love. The turning point came when the rancher finally addressed the feelings he had long kept hidden. He spoke of the loneliness that had marked his life, of the emptiness he had felt despite the successes on his land, and of the joy her presence had brought him. He admitted, without hesitation, that he could not imagine life without her, and that her staying had transformed the meaning of his days. This declaration was neither rushed nor forced. It was the natural culmination of weeks of shared experience, trust, and mutual care. The Apache woman, moved by his honesty, allowed herself to respond fully. She admitted that her initial intention had been to stay only briefly, but that she had come to see the ranch and the man who tended it as a place where she could belong. She recognized in him a partner who respected her independence, valued her opinions, and had become both protector and companion. Her acknowledgement of feelings was not a surrender, but a conscious choice to embrace trust and commitment, understanding that love could coexist with strength and self-reliance. Their emotional connection deepened through simple yet meaningful actions over the following days. They worked together on the ranch with newfound joy, shared meals by the fire, and spent long evenings under the open sky, talking, laughing, and planning for the future. The Apache woman introduced elements of her own culture, stories of her people, traditional songs, and small customs, enriching the rancher's life and grounding their relationship in mutual respect. In turn, he shared the rhythms of ranch life, teaching her the intricacies of managing livestock, tending the land, and navigating the challenges of the frontier. Each act reinforced their compatibility, emphasizing that love was not merely emotional, but practical, grounded in daily cooperation and shared goals. External challenges also tested their commitment. Perhaps neighbors questioned their unconventional union, or lingering threats from the frontier reminded them that life could be unpredictable. Yet, these obstacles only strengthened their resolve. Together, they confronted challenges with courage, resourcefulness, and unity. The Apache woman's intelligence and adaptability complemented the rancher's strength and experience, and together they overcame dangers that might have overwhelmed either alone. This cooperation cemented the understanding that partnership was not simply about emotion, but about shared responsibility and mutual support. As the story approached its climax, the rancher made a decisive gesture to solidify their commitment. Perhaps he offered a token of lasting intention, a simple band, a shared home improvement, or a symbolic act demonstrating his desire for a life together. The Apache woman responded with her own gesture, affirming her intention to remain not as a guest, but as a partner in life. In that moment, the past, full of isolation, danger, and uncertainty, was replaced by the promise of a future built on trust, respect, and love. The story concludes with a quiet, intimate scene. The two sit together on the porch, watching the sunset over the plains. The Apache woman leans gently against the rancher, their hands intertwined, the hardships and dangers of the past melting into the comfort of shared life. Words are unnecessary. The connection is palpable, expressed in gestures, presence, and mutual understanding. The ranch, once a place of solitude, has become a home. The man, once solitary, has found a partner, and the woman, once wandering and cautious, has found belonging. This final outline emphasizes the culmination of emotional, practical, and romantic development. It resolves internal and external conflicts, showing that love is strengthened through trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. The narrative demonstrates that true partnership is forged not only in moments of passion, but also through the quiet labor of daily life, acts of care, and steadfast commitment. Through these 5 outlines, the story arcs from a chance encounter to lasting partnership, weaving elements of danger, survival, emotional growth, and love. The Apache woman and the rancher evolve together, each learning from and complementing the other, culminating in a believable, satisfying resolution that honors both their independence and their bond.